Welcome to the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast with Brian Loughrin.
Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast with Brian Loughrin. I'm your host, Mike Leon. Brian here is a seasoned tax attorney with over 25 years of experience helping business owners, self-employed professionals resolve serious IRS problems from audits and tax debt to representation even before the U.S. tax court. He's based out in Tampa. He's been representing clients nationwide, and he focuses extensively on federal tax controversies, including debt resolution and defending against IRS enforcement actions. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about what happens when a business falls behind on payroll taxes and how to handle it. So, Brian, good to see you as always. Let's get into the first question here, which is, explain to me what payroll tax debt is and why it is so important to the IRS.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Payroll tax represents probably about 80% of what the IRS takes in. And I think for a lot of people that like to follow the news or just kind of get an idea of how the country runs, obviously the IRS is the bill collector for the federal government. And it's easy to sometimes look at tariffs are in the news a lot right now and how much money that's bringing in. And there's certain types of kind of esoteric type taxes. But the fact is about 80% of what the IRS collects every year is from payroll tax withholding. And that's as simple as somebody who works for somebody else that has taxes taken out of their paycheck. So the IRS system is geared to be very aggressive when it comes to businesses that fail to make the payroll tax deposits, meaning the taxes that are withheld. If the business fails to turn those over to the IRS timely, and in some cases they have 3 days to do it, the system is geared to be very aggressive in collecting it.
What are some common scenarios in your years of doing this that cause businesses to fall behind on these payroll taxes?
Well, for people that call me, I always think if it's somebody that's a legitimate crook and all that, they're not going to waste their time calling me. They're not looking to get it fixed. The people that call me that have payroll tax issues, business owners, are people that want to get it fixed. And they find themselves in that situation under just various scenarios. I think one of the more common one is where you have a smaller business, say under 30 employees, and their payroll tax withholding is a pretty hefty amount every pay period, which is usually in some cases every week or every 2 weeks. And something happens to that business. I've seen situations where you have businesses under contract to provide services to a large entity, and they lose that contract overnight. And the business owner's thinking, well, I'm going to step up. I'm going to replace that source of income. I'm going to find somebody else. And in the meantime, because it's a small business and they've developed relationships with these employees, and in some cases they're socializing with them or doing family events with them, they don't want to just cut these people loose and say, look, I can't pay you because we don't have the work. They'll keep these people on. But the one area where they can kind of make up the loss of income, so to speak, is not sending in the federal tax deposits and thinking that maybe they're going to get it turned around quickly. Well, in some cases, it's not as quick as they hoped, or in some cases, they don't really ever get it turned around. And that's really when I'll hear from them.
You know, Brian, I heard recently a term, trust fund recovery penalty, and I was like, I got to ask Brian what that means. Brian, can you explain what this is, why it can put a business owner's personal finances at risk?
Well, it's more than just their finances. It can put their liberty, which is a legally fancy term for saying for them to go to jail. Trust fund recovery penalty, essentially it's this: when a business processes payroll and they have the withholding, which is usually roughly a third of the total payroll, that money at the time the payroll is processed, that deposit, if you will, becomes property of the federal government, even if the money's not in the bank. Because business owners will say, well, I ran payroll, I had just enough to cover the net wages, I didn't have the money in the bank for the taxes, so I never even had the money. And what I'll say is, it doesn't matter if you had the money or not. If you fail to send it in within the time frame, which can be as short as 3 days, the government can treat that as theft, because that federal withholding was never your money from the moment that you process payroll. You were holding it in trust. A simple analogy is this, and I've used this many times. Out-of-town friend calls you up. He's in a particular situation. He says, listen, I've got some cash. I'm coming through town. Can I stop by? Can I leave this with you? I don't feel safe where I'm going with it. I don't want to take a chance of losing it and so forth. Just hold it. I'll be back in a week. And the guy says, yeah, that's fine. person comes by, they leave off the cash with you and so forth. Takes off. The next day, your baby's sick and you have to go rush to get medical help or medicine or something, and you use that cash to pay for it. And then the guy comes back a week later. He says, "Hey, where's my money?" He said, "Well, I had a kid that was going to die, and he needed to buy medicine, get medical treatment. I had to use the money for that." The guy says, "Look, I understand. Life happens, stuff happens, but that wasn't your money. You were holding it in trust for me, so that wasn't yours to spend." So it just shows that regardless of the reason why the employer doesn't send in the deposits, the IRS looks at it as their money, and legally it is.
Right.
And it dovetails into a situation where people say, if I don't pay my taxes, I'm going to go to jail. And I say to people, look, they're not going to put you in prison just for not paying taxes. Okay. I mean, they don't have debtor's prison in the United States. But when it comes to payroll tax, if the trust fund is assessed, and I'll elaborate on that in just a moment, they can pursue people and they can hold them criminally liable. And it's a lot more likely something like that's going to happen than somebody being held criminally liable for, say, failing to file a return.
Brian, how fast does the IRS usually act? Because you just mentioned about how much money the federal government collects from payroll taxes. How fast does the IRS then usually act when payroll taxes go unpaid compared to other types of tax debt?
Probably about 10 times the speed. I tell people, if somebody calls me and say, listen, I have payroll tax debt of $50,000. To me, in some respects, that's like handling a personal tax debt of 10 times that in terms of how aggressive the IRS is, how quickly they move. There's no magic set time frame, if you will. There have been so many changes to the IRS since COVID and the staffing and so forth. But it's the kind of thing that when they do knock on the door, it's as serious as a heart attack because they're not going to let up on it until it's resolved. I do want to add one thing really quickly on that trust fund, Mike, because I didn't explain that part, and that is simply this. And I'll simplify it by saying a business owner. When the payroll taxes are not paid, the IRS will contact that business, and they will say, who's responsible for these taxes not getting paid? Well, for my clients, it's mostly small business owners, okay, although it could be somebody else working there. And the IRS will look at the owner and say, okay, well, since you own the business and you make determinations for where the monies go, we're going to hold you personally liable under your name and social security number for that unpaid payroll tax deposit. So it's not just the business that owes it, but they can attribute it to the business owner under their name and social. But one important distinction, and this is something that a lot of people get mixed up on the front end, the IRS is not trying to collect the exact same amount from the business and the business owner at the same time. They're not trying to double dip. They just want to get paid. But at that point, they don't care if you pay it personally or the business pays it. Either way, they're going to pursue collection. And again, it can be for business. It can be as simple as, if it gets down to it, they'll garnish income sources. They'll levy bank accounts, and if they garnish income sources for some businesses, it's a death knell. If they send an accounts receivable levy to a vendor that's paying the bulk of that business's income, I've never seen a business receive an accounts receivable levy on a trust fund issue or payroll tax issue and not comply with it. I mean, if they don't comply, they're in criminal trouble. So it's as serious as a heart attack.
You mentioned about someone knocking on the door. So if a revenue officer is assigned to the case, and he knocks on the door, what can you kind of explain what that process looks like for the business owner?
One of the things the IRS changed a few years ago is the commissioner at the time, Danny Werfel, announced, and I was actually at a meeting, a seminar, where he was speaking, that the IRS is going to make no unannounced visits any further to business owners or individuals. So it hasn't been quite the same way. What generally happens is the IRS will send letters, and it's usually from a local IRS revenue officer. And if the letters go unanswered, then it's a situation where they can pursue it individually. But basically, they'll knock on the door, they'll ring the doorbell, or if it's a business, they'll come into the business. And that can be a really awkward situation. And I tell people, look, if you're getting these letters and it has the name of a revenue officer in your city, that's a time to reach out, because they're going to continue to pursue it, whether or not you respond to that letter or notice.
Yeah. Don't ignore those letters. So, Brian, let me ask you then, in terms of resolution and the options for folks, what are some that are available for people that are facing payroll tax debt? And how is it different, again, from the solution for other tax issues?
Well, for some businesses, it's clear that there's no viable going forward for the business. I mean, something's happened, and in some cases, I see quite often where somebody owns a business that they're kind of hands on, and it's a blue collar type business that all of a sudden the guy's 60 years old and he can't do the same kind of work he used to, or just the income sources are dwindling. And I'll talk to my clients and I'll say, well, how viable is your business? How long do you think you can sustain continuing this work? Other people, they just, for various reasons, they might lose a license if it's a professional. I've represented medical individuals, doctors and dentists and so forth that have lost their license. And I said, well, listen, you ain't going to practice medicine. So, you need to close down the clinic, close down the practice. And so then it all falls back to whether or not the business has assets. And for my clients, usually they've pretty much exhausted whatever assets they have financially or what they can get rid of to pay the payroll tax. So usually there's nothing there. So then it'll fall to the individual. But that falls back to the trust fund issue. And then it goes to the individual, which in that case, you're looking at resolving the matter in much the same way as if that person had filed a personal tax return maybe a year or two prior for owing the same amount. At that point, the IRS's efforts of collection pretty much revert to what it would be as if the individual just had earned that income in a prior tax period.
Brian, in a previous episode, we were talking about why it's better to be a little bit more proactive than reactive, get somebody professional like yourself to help out. Is it realistic for a business owner then to handle negotiations with the IRS, or explain why it's important to get somebody professional, somebody that can help, why it's essential?
Well, I tell you what, I've represented many people through the years, the last 20 plus years, and I have represented everybody from a guy that was literally mowing lawns with a lawnmower and a weed trimmer out of the trunk of his car to a guy that was a former NASA rocket scientist. I remember when I first talked to him, that's kind of interesting. I said, you obviously have a PhD. I said, what is it in? He told me some area of science. He had a PhD in. I'd never even heard of it. I mean, I never even heard of that area of science. This guy had a PhD in it. So my point is, it's not about level of education. It's not about level of intelligence. It's not about how capable you are at your own chosen profession. A lot of times people just don't understand how the IRS works. It's a large government agency full of its own quirks. And there's certain things that going about how you resolve it can make a big difference. And that's why I tell people, give a call. We'll talk with you. And look, if it's something you can do on your own and you don't need to involve a professional, if it's fairly straightforward, I tell people, you don't need to pay anybody to get this fixed. This is what you can do. But in other instances, I say, listen, this is going to get a lot more tricky than you might think. And it's not about how smart you are or what your education is. It's about understanding how this works. And we understand how it works because we've been doing it a long time.
So, Brian, let's give that business owner that's listening right now, give them that one practical action that they can take right now, right today, to start turning around their payroll tax situation.
Give a call, because part of it is when I first talk with people that call into the office, I'll get a quick understanding where they are on their current payroll. And that means what payroll they just ran and the next one they're going to run, and kind of get a feel for where it is. Because in some cases, they're not running it correctly, or they're need to make some hard decisions, because ultimately it's going to come back to them. And then I want to get a feel for where they are exactly right now. And then I'll start looking back at some of the notices that they've received. As a point of reference, I had a client recently come in and they said, these are what we owe. It was on payroll tax. These are the tax periods we owe for. And I looked at it and I said, are you sure there's anything older than that? Well, this is what the paperwork shows. Well, the thing with the IRS is they'll send out certain notices based upon the age of the debt that doesn't always include the full balance due from that business or individual. And so if I'd have just had them proceed with what they thought they owed, they would have found themselves in a situation that was a lot worse than what they expected. So it's just really sizing up where they stand at the immediate moment, and then looking back at where they are as far as total balances, total tax periods involved. And then realistically, as I said, how viable is the business? If it's something you want to continue on, then we'll work with the IRS to get it figured out, because we want to put something together that's going to be acceptable to the IRS, but at the same time livable and workable for our clients, because we're never going to put somebody in a situation that's impossible for them to continue on. We're never going to do that. It would be a waste of time and money.
Brian, thank you so much for the time and insights on this. Oh, as always, we truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
And thank you to everybody listening to another episode of the IRS Debt and Audit Podcast. Listen, If you're a business owner and you owe payroll taxes, you know what you got to do. You go to TampaTaxRelief.com right now, schedule a consultation with Brian and his team so he can help you understand your options and fight for the best possible outcome. If you like this episode, do me a favor, leave a comment, review, subscribe, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. As always, I'm Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.